Hello and welcome to Daily Prelims Practice, where we take up the questions from the Hindu and Indian Express and curate them as per the demands of Civil Services Prelims examination. The questions for the discussion are listed on your screen. Moving on to the first article of the day that has appeared on page 12 of the Hindu, basically talks about the Central Vigilance Commission. The article mentions Vigilance Commissioner Praveen Kumar Srivastava has been appointed as the acting Central Vigilance Commissioner. The article further talks about the commission and says the commission is headed by a CVC and have a maximum of 2 vigilance commissioners under it. Through this article, we'll try to understand the various provisions regarding the Central Vigilance Commission. As UPSC has consistently asked questions related to various constitutional and non-constitutional bodies under the polity section in the prelims examination. And such a question related to the Election Commission was also seen in the year 2017. So various bodies, commissions become important from the perspective of prelims for us. As we can see here, the question in 2017 about the Election Commission of India. Moving on to the practice question, it says, consider the following statements regarding the Central Vigilance Commission. The first statement here is, it is a multi-member body and the appointments are made by the President. Now this statement is correct. Analyzing this statement, we have seen that CVC is a multi-member body comprising of Central Vigilance Commissioner and not more than 2 Vigilance Commissioners. They are appointed by the President by warrant under his hand and seal on the recommendations of a 3-member committee which comprises of the Prime Minister as his head, the Union Minister of Home Affairs and the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. Further, they hold office for a term of 4 years or until they attain the age of 65 years, whichever is earlier. Moving on to the second statement, it says it has the power to regulate its own procedure. Now this statement is also correct, as the Central Vigilance Commission is vested with the power to regulate its own procedure. And it has all the powers of a civil code and its proceedings thus have a judicial character. Further, the central government or its authorities shall consider the advice of CVC and take appropriate action. The central government or any of the authority can disagree with the advice of the CVC, but it is required to communicate the reasons in writing to the CVC for such a disapproval or such a disagreement. Moving on to the third statement, it says the members of CVC are eligible for reappointment. Now this statement is incorrect, as after the tenure of 4 years or the age of 65, whichever is earlier, they are not eligible for further employment under the central or the state government. The question further says which of the following statements are correct, and as only statement 1 and 2 are correct, the correct code for the given question will be option B. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is option D. Another thing to understand here regarding the CVC is that it has to present annually to the President a report for its performance, which is laid down by the President before each house of the Parliament. Page 12 of the Hindu basically talks about the Gorkha Land Territorial Administration and the demand of the separate statehood. Now, a question regarding the same can be framed in 2 manners here. Provisions under the Part 1 of Indian Constitution, creation or altercation of boundaries regarding with the state, or can also be framed with regard to the 6th schedule, as previously there was an offering of Gorkha land to be included under the provisions of the 6th schedule, which was vehemently opposed by the people or the protesters for the Gorkha land, which demanded separate statehood. In the previous discussion, we have seen various questions regarding the statehood. So during this discussion, we will focus on the 6th schedule and the various provisions regarding it, as UPSC has consistently asked questions regarding various schedules under the Indian polity section. And in 2022, it also asked about the question related to anti-defection law or the 10th schedule of Indian Constitution. In 2015, it also asked about the idea of the welfare state and it being a part of any schedule or other than that. A practice question in this regard can be framed. The practice question here says, consider the following statement for the districts, basically the autonomous districts under the 6th schedule. The first statement here is, Governor is empowered to organize and reorganize the autonomous district. Now this statement is correct. The constitution under the 6th schedule contains special provisions for the administration of tribal areas of 4 northeastern states, which can be sufficed as an acronym known as TAMEMI, which stands for Tripura, Assam, Meghalaya and the Mizoram. Now the tribal areas in the four states of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram have been constituted as autonomous district. One thing to remember here is that they do not fall outside the executive authority of the state concerned. Further, it is given that the governor is empowered to organize and reorganize the autonomous district. Thus, he can increase or decrease their areas or change their names or define their boundaries and so on. So, statement 1 is correct. Moving on to the second statement, it says the acts of parliament or the state legislature apply with specified modification and exceptions as per the directions of governor. Now this statement is partially correct only. We have seen that the sixth schedule consists of four states: Tripura, Assam, Meghalaya and Mizoram. Now with regard to Assam, the governor has the sole power, that is the power of direction in respect to the acts that have been made by either parliament or even the state legislature. But in case of Tripura, Meghalaya and Mizoram, the power is vested either with president or with the governor. Now with regard to the state acts, the power to make specific modification rests with the governor, and in relation with the acts that are being made by the parliament, the power of modification and exceptions rest with the president in case of Tripura, Meghalaya and Mizoram. So statement 2 is only partially correct, hence it is incorrect. The question for this is which of the following statements are correct, and as only statement 1 is correct, the correct code for the given question will be option A. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is option B. Moving on to the next question of the day that has featured in the Hindu basically talks about the Eklavya teachers that are to receive training in the computer science. Now this article basically talks about the Eklavya model residential scheme. So we'll try to cover the various aspects under the ERMS scheme, what it is and what are the various provisions under the same, as UPSC in the previous year has asked about the various government initiatives and the schemes that are being introduced for the welfare of general public or particularly the vulnerable section of the society. And such a scheme was also asked in the year 2017 where it asked about the recognition of prior learning scheme. The practice question in this regard says, consider the following statements regarding Eklavya Model Residential Scheme or the ERMS. Now the first statement here is, the funding under the scheme is charged upon Consolidated Fund of India. Now this statement is correct. Basically, the ERMS scheme was started in the year 1997 to impart quality education to ST children in remote areas in order to enable them to avail the opportunities in high and professional education courses. The schools that are established under the ERMS scheme follow the CBSE curriculum. The fund for this scheme is to come from the grants that are made under Article 275 Clause 1 and are charged upon Consolidated Fund of India as grant in aid. So statement 1 is correct. Moving on to the second statement, it states there is a provision for a day boarding schools where the tribal population is more than 50%. Now this statement is incorrect because as per the ERMS guidelines, the Eklavya Model School is to be set up in each integrated tribal development project which is having 50% of ST population. Basically, these are the residential schools. In 2018-19 budget, it was announced that every block with more than 50% of a tribal population and at least 20,000 tribal persons will have Eklavya Model Residential School by the year 2022. Now, there is also a new provision. Wherever the density of the ST population is more than 90%, it is proposed to set up Eklavya Model Day Boarding School on experimental basis. Thus, the day boarding schools are to be established only on experimental basis, and that too in the areas where the density of ST population is more than 90% and not the residential school. The 50% criteria is for the residential school. Moving on with the question, it says which of the following statements are correct, and as only statement 1 is correct, the correct code for the given question will be option A. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is also option A. Moving on to the next article of the day that has appeared in page 12 of the Indian Express basically talks about the science on optics with regard to the banking sector and talks about the various indicators that represents the banking performance, whether it is the NPA, that is the non-performing assets, or with regard to the capital adequacy ratio, etc. Now, in our previous discussion, we have seen various questions regarding the NPA in the formal banking sector. In this discussion, we'll try to understand the various provisions regarding the agricultural loans and their categorization. As UPSC previously has also asked questions related to various banking indicators, and such a question was seen in the year 2018 where it asked about the capital adequacy ratio and the provisions related to it. The practice question in this regard says, with reference to the agricultural loans, consider the following statement. Now the first statement here is, for short duration crops, the loan is classified as NPA if the interest remain overdue for one crop season. Now this statement is incorrect. Now we need to first understand what is the short duration crop and what is a long duration crop. Long duration crops are the crops with crop season longer than 1 year, and short duration crops are the crops with the crop season shorter than 1 year. So in case of agricultural loans, the loan is classified as NPA if the installment of principal or the interest remains overdue for 2 crop season in case of short duration crops. Moving on to the second statement, it says for long duration crops, the loan is classified as NPA or non-performing asset if the interest remain overdue for 2 crop season. Now this statement is again incorrect, as loan is classified as NPA if the installment of principal or the interest for a long duration crops remain overdue for one crop season. The question further says, which of the following statement given above is or are correct? And as none of the statement given above is correct, the correct code for the given question will be option D. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is option A. Moving on to the next article of the day, which has featured on the page 15 of the Indian Express, basically talks about the climate change and highlights that 1.5 degree rise in temperature looms around the world, but it will not be the end, and also focuses on the progress that has been made in adapting to the new world. Now the article also mentioned about the reports submitted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. Now various environmental organizations, their funds, initiatives and summits have been asked previously by the UPSC in the prelims examination under the environment section. So this area becomes important for us from the perspective of prelims, as in 2017 UPSC asked about the Global Climate Change Alliance initiative, and thus a question regarding the IPCC can be framed in this way. The practice question says, consider the following statement with reference to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The first statement here is, IPCC is an intergovernmental body of the United Nations. Now this statement is correct, as IPCC is an intergovernmental body of UN which is responsible for advancing knowledge on human-induced climate change. The organization was established in 1988. The second statement here says, IPCC was established by World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Programme, or the UNEP. Now this statement is correct, as it was established in 1988 and has its headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, and has around 195 members under it. Moving on to the third statement, it says, IPCC conducts original research to monitor climate change caused by the human activity. Now this statement is incorrect. Though IPCC provides objective, comprehensive scientific information on anthropogenic climate change, including natural, political and economic impacts and the risk associated with them, it does not conduct its own original research, nor does it monitor the climate change, but it rather undertakes a periodic systematic review of all relevant scientific literature and compiles key findings into assessment reports. So basically, IPCC relies on the various scientific literature and the studies done around the world. And these IPCC assessment reports play a key role in climate negotiation held by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The question further says, which of the following statement is or are correct? And as only statement 1 and 2 are correct, the correct code for the given question will be option A. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is also option A. Moving on to the last article of the day that has appeared on page 15 of the Indian Express, basically talks about the methods of dispute resolution among the states. Now, under politics section, UPSC has previously asked questions related to various provisions regarding federal structure in India and how federalism works, and a practice question thus in this regard can be framed with regard to the Interstate Council, as in 2018 UPSC has asked about the President power under Article 356. The practice question in this regard says, the Constitution of India provides for Interstate Council and its composition as well. Now this statement is incorrect, as Constitution under Article 263 does not mention anything about the composition of the Interstate Council. Moving on to the second statement, it says, President may by notification impose such restrictions on freedom of trade between one state and another or within any part of territory of India as may be required in the public interest. Now, this statement is also incorrect, as under Article 302, only the Parliament has the power to impose restrictions on the interstate trade and not the President. The question further says, which of the statement given above is or are incorrect, and as both the statements are incorrect, the correct code for the given question will be option C. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is option B.